Bridges. Yeah, they took 10 triax. Yeah, so I think. Where it's or my different but my neighbor's apartment. Then I was
And you? Oh, maybe.
never. Yeah,
Well, and
you know what I'm gonna.
and the construction, I mean, they have to build a concrete factory out there, and so and they did it in a series of blocks, and then that's the same. Pretty when you are.
Well, good afternoon. It is 1 o'clock or shortly thereafter, so we'll go ahead and call this working group to order. It's the working group to examine the taxation of federally recognized tribal nations. I am Jeffrey Beckham, Secretary of the Office of Policy and Management, and by virtue of Public Act 23-204, Section 359, I appear to be the chair of this working group. This came as news to me at the end of the session, but there you go. This is how things go. The working group also consists of various chairpersons and ranking members of the General Assembly. Some of whom are here, some of whom may be online at some point. I'll let them introduce themselves. We've also got representatives of our federally recognized Indian tribes on the panel. And municipalities are either going to be represented in person or online as well at some point, one presumes. So we are here, just to say it, in the words of the Public Act that brought us here, to examine the issue of taxation, examine the taxation of reservation land held in trust for federally recognized tribes in the state and tangible personal property located on such reservation land. Fairly broad task. We are then to, by next January 1st, submit a report on findings and recommendations about that examination. So, full disclosure, I have not devoted a large part of my career to this topic, and I'll be leaning on other members of the panel as well as staff who I can bring to bear on this topic. But we'll proceed from there. I'll let other members of the panel introduce themselves for whoever may be listening to us.
Thank you, Secretary Beckham. I'm Kathy Austin. This committee requires members of appropriations, finance, and planning and development to be on it. Also members of the two federally recognized tribal nations, both Mashantucket and Mohegan, are here. And so usually we would start just going down, but I think that as it is relative to the two tribal nations, I would have the respective members of the tribal nations or their staff introduce themselves. And so Betsy, Jared, Chuck.
I'm Betsy Conway, Senior Legal Counsel at the Mashantucket Pequot Tribe. Have been with the tribe, working with the tribe since 1993, so almost since the beginning, and happy to be here.
Good afternoon. My name is Jody Cummings.
I am the general counsel for the Mashantucket Pequot Tribe, and an enrolled member of the Lumbee Tribe of North Carolina. And just want to thank you all for being here and convening this gathering. This issue is something that's near and dear to my heart, something we've obviously worked on since I've been with the tribe, started in 2020, but even before that in my federal service at the Department of the Interior, dealing with the issue of dual taxation and outside governments taxing activities on tribal lands is something that I spent a lot of time dealing with. And so I'm really grateful that we're convening this really important discussion. Thank you.
For that. Secretary, Mr. Chairman. Chuck Bell, I'm the Chief of Staff of the Mohican Tribe. I've been either Deputy Chief of Staff or Chief of Staff for the last 26 years. I have worked with the tribe prior to that in my role with U.S. Senator Dodd's office as the legislative assistant dealing with Native American affairs. We also very much appreciate the opportunity to really delve into the relationship between our three governments and taxation and pull it apart and really look at it, figure out a way that we can continue to work together the way we have for generations. And appreciate your all taking time for summer.
Thank you, sir. We have other members of the legislature here. Representative Cheeseman, you want to introduce yourself?
Of course, thank you. Holly Cheeseman, I'm the ranking member on Finance Revenue and Bonding, and again, happy to be here as we have a frank and meaningful discussion, because I know there are different views on this, and I think it's important that we have a venue where they are aired, and ideally come up with a solution that recognizes the importance of both our federally recognized tribes and the municipalities that are involved. So thank you very much.
Representative Horn.
Thank you, Secretary Peckham. I am Representative Maria Horn. I am the House Chair of the committee. I have had the great pleasure of working with our two federally recognized tribes and issues as well in the past, which is that's a real opportunity for me to tell you all a little bit better. And I also thank you, Mr. Secretary, for chairing us. And I'm glad to have this group of people sitting down together to, in a tight circle, try to work out some of these thorny issues of full principle and, economic development for everybody here. So glad to be here. Thanks.
Thank you, Representative Horn. I think online we have other members of the General Assembly. I see Representative Walker there.
Good afternoon, everybody. And I also want to thank everybody for coming together to talk about this, because it, just like many of you, I was not familiar with this whole situation of dual taxation and the importance of making sure that we have transparency for all people who we are representing in our state. And I look so forward to the conversation. And I'm going to keep myself muted because I'm in my town, and it's a very noisy town. So thank you very much. And thank you, everybody, for coming. Thank you.
Ms. Smith on the line for the Mashantucket, I'm sorry, Swift. What did I say? Oh, sorry, Swift.
Yeah. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Jean Swift. I'm the Chief Financial Officer for the Mashantucket Pequot Tribal Nation, also an enrolled member. I had previously served for about 5 years as the treasurer to the Tribal Council for the tribe. And I was fortunate enough to work with the treasurer, Chief Malerba, on the dual taxation subcommittee. I'm still a member of that on the TTAC. When she came into her current role, she essentially asked me to join TTAC on the larger scale. And so I've been honored to serve on that as well. This is most definitely a national matter, dual taxation. It's not just a state matter. And I'm very pleased that we've taken up this issue. Chairman Butler asked me to please send his regards and to thank the committee for their dedication in looking to resolve this longstanding injustice, as well as the respect for tribal sovereignty. So thank you all.
Thank you. I see Mayor McDaniel on the line.
Yes, excuse me. Yes, good afternoon, Mayor Montville, Ron McDaniel, and look forward to see what comes out of these proceedings.
Thanks, sir. We have Senator Rockman online. Senator?
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Senator Roman. Actually, I'm the PND Senate Chair. Thank you. Good to be here.
Thank you, sir. Do we have other, Sue, you see other representatives online, other members of, I don't see anyone else on the list. It seems to be everyone. Well, we do have a short agenda that we prepared for today, discussing the tangible personal property taxation as well as real property taxation. I do have an associate with me today, Attorney Dayton, who's done some preliminary research, and he can just summarize for us. Matt, if you want to come to the table at some point where there's a microphone, he has a couple of just to set the stage in terms of where we are in terms of the law, the state and local taxation of property on tribal lands.
Thank you, Secretary. My name is Matt Dayton. I'm the Undersecretary for Legal Affairs at the Office of Policy and Management. Taking a look into the issues here and doing that dive, I came up with a quote from the New Mexico Court of Appeals that I think really kind of lays a framework here. It says that few areas of the law generate as much controversy, complexity, and confusion as the scope of the state's power to impose taxes that impact Native Americans. And with that, I'm going to try to give a very high-level explanation in 1 to 2 minutes of the law here. So the working group here was established by public access here and was to examine, as the Secretary rightfully points out, the taxation of reservation land held in trust and the tangible personal property there. So really looking into here the property taxation, which explains why we have representatives from our municipalities on this working group as well. While I told you it was complicated, I think our first half of this may be fairly simple. Reservation land is immune from real property taxation. It's clear, it's federally preempted, and so long as that is held in trust by the federal government, we don't have much to talk about on the land there. So that's a simple one, I believe. We turn to the tangible property thereon, though, that becomes a little more complicated. We start to look at a couple of things. So first off, if the legal incidence of the tax is on the tribe or tribal member, it is exempt unless there is express congressional authorization to tax it. The Supreme Court has said the states are categorically barred from placing legal incidence of tax on the tribe or its members. When it turns to non-members, however, though, we start to get into a more complicated analysis. So there's a two-part test set forth by the Supreme Court in the White Mountain Apache tribe versus Bracker. The first part of the test is the tax expressly preempted by federal law? And if it is not expressly preempted by federal law, we now turn to a second question. It says, does the taxation unlawfully infringe on the right of reservation Native Americans to make their own laws? So in Connecticut, we did have a case, as I'm sure you are all more deeply involved in than I have been, with the Massachusetts Pequot tribe versus Ledyard, and that pertained to the taxation of slot machines. And the reason those slot machines were were at issue is because they're not owned by the tribe. They're in fact owned by a third party who leases them to the tribe. The Second Circuit stepped in and said, okay, there's going to be that kind of weighting test where we look at the balance. We say, we look at the tribe, the interest of the tribes, and the interest of the municipality. They look at the tribe's economic development and sovereignty interests. They also looked at the municipal need for revenue and the connection between the tax and the services that those municipalities provided. And the court found that the quote economic effect of the tax in the tribe was negligible, but its economic value in the town was not. The tribe's sovereign interest in being able to exercise sole taxing authority over possession of property is insufficient to outweigh the state's interest in uniform application of its generally applicable tax. In short, the Second Circuit permitted the town of Ledyard to impose tax on those slot machines that are on the Mashantucket Pequot Reservation and owned by a third party. They allowed them to impose personal property tax to the tune of approximately $50,000 per year. I will note that the Second Circuit does control in Connecticut, because we are part of the Second Circuit. There is a decision in Oklahoma that goes the opposite way. The Oklahoma Supreme Court specifically disagreed with the National Pequot case and found that slot machines in a similar fact pattern were exempt. So that's much why we're here today. There is, from what I've seen, there is, back in 2022, there was a bill that would exempt personal property and real property on the reservations from taxation. And that would have resulted in about a revenue loss of $600,000 to Ledyard and $700,000 to Montville. And obviously, those could be greater or less depending on future development on the reservations. So that's my 1 to 2 minute explanation of the kind of framework of what we're looking at here. And certainly I will turn over to you. We're much more involved and much deeper involved in that. So hopefully I did not summarize it too generically.
Great job.
Thank you, Matt. Appreciate that. Just to set the table for those of us who are novices to this topic. Does anyone have a reaction to that or anything you look here to offer or add? Go ahead.
That's Conway. Great job, Matt. I mean, it is a very complicated, difficult area, and I think you did a great job at summarizing what has come out of that. I think I'm glad you mentioned the Oklahoma case because one of the things that, and you probably saw this in the case, that has been so challenging for Native American tribes is the fact that that balancing test, it can come out one way one day, it can come out the other way another day. And that's very difficult for economic development. So when you're trying to tell, okay, in our jurisdiction, this is what happens in economic development, it's really hard when the ball is always moving. The only other thing I would add is, Gene Swift mentioned this, because the balancing test is so uncertain, many states, and we have many examples, have jumped into this arena to develop their own law, just like what we were suggesting be done. To look at it, to look at tax policy within the state and to make their own decision on what should it be in this state. And we have a lot of examples of different tribes and they've done it in all different ways. That's the only thing I would add.
Thank you.
The only thing I would add is we fully agree with tribal sovereignty and absolutely foundation. We are as governments and how they're at the state. There are in Mohegan's case and other tribes' cases across the country, there are other restrictive agreements that one tribe might have that another might not have. And so we want to make sure as we look at the issue that we also look at the individual tribes within the borders and how these other agreements might affect future taxation, current taxation. Certainly with some of those agreements that are codified.
Yeah, I guess, I'm glad Chuck brought that out because that was one of the key issues that there was debate around during the session and how we were looking at this issue. Going back to something that you said early on, you kind of made the distinction between Indian-owned property that's taxed and non-Indian property that's subject to tax. And I think the way we're coming at this issue, how we're looking at this is that issue is there with the agreement that the Mohegan tribe has with the town of Montville. That being said, that is a distinct issue in our opinion from whether non-Indian owned property should be subject to tax if it's located on tribal trust. So two issues clearly, but two very distinct issues that can be dealt with separately. Certainly, the same conversation they can be brought up in. That being said, they can be dealt with in very different ways.
Senator Austin.
Thank you, Matt. But I also think that there's one important piece that while the sovereign lands, the lands that are in trust are bordered with a respective municipality, that is true. But what does that municipality provide for resources for those individual vendors? And really, one of the things that I think we really have to recognize is that both tribal nations have their own government. They have their own courts. They have their own police stations and police departments. They have their own fire departments. They have two different reservations. They have a reservation with a lot of children on one and not a lot of children on the other. So some of these are impactful just because of the number of young people that are involved. So there are after-school activities that happen in both tribal governments. There is daycare at the Mashantucket. Most recently, the daycare during the pandemic, I believe the daycare was closed in the Mohegan side. They have public works that are in both tribal nations. They have their own utilities. They have a sewer treatment plant, a water treatment plant, a cogen at Mashantucket. Mohegan has upgraded the Montville sewer treatment plant and sends their sewer to the Montville treatment plant. So all of the services that are provided to those businesses are not paid for by those municipalities. The Ledyard educational system receives money around $786,000 to their educational system in a manner to pay for the children that go to the Ledyard school system. And that's children that go to the Ledyard school system that are reflective of the children that live on the reservation. Children that are related to tribal members that live in the town of Ledyard, and children that work, that have parents that work at the business activities on the reservation. So they receive close to $800,000 for that. Montville does not calculate the number of children that they have involved in the Mohegan reservation to get the dollars. They have determined that that is not of value to do that for them. They have, although they have 33% of Mohegan workers live in Montville, so hopefully they'll reconsider that, because that's a good chunk of change relative to what would offset the cost of workers' children that live in the community that go there. So they also both are impactful in the communities. Not only do they pay for nonprofit events, they participate in food banks, they participate in nonprofit organizations, they participate in many events and help out in ways that are not immaterial. They're very material in what they do. That's not what the vendors do, unlike vendors that might, businesses that might be in the community. Vendors at the tribal nations generally are not embedded in the community outside of the reservation. They are embedded in the community within the confines of the reservation. And Mashantucket in particular are top 10 taxpayers in Ledyard, North Stonington, Norwich, Preston, Stonington, Waterford. They both pay taxes to East Windsor, where they have a business entity that is not taken off as a result of the agreement on the gaming. Was one of those was that they would not institute that gaming. So, and most recently in this last legislative session, we increased the amount of taxes that were being, we increased the money from the Mashantucket Mohegan Pequot Fund, only determined by the alphabet, MAMO, not by any other way. So that that we give another $1 million out of the Mashantucket Mohegan Pequot Fund to East Windsor. That totals over $10 million to East Windsor for a building that the agreement barred the two tribal nations from executing the gaming part of that. So that was a decision, that was one of the things that the administration wanted in the agreement, that would not happen. So I think that there has to be an understanding that if we're looking at this, and I'm not opposed to as appropriations chair, I've talked with Representative Walker about this before, that we increase the funding to Mohegan and Ledger to not lose the funds from this, because I believe the policy that we have here on dual taxation was a court decision that was wrong-headed, and we often as a legislature deal with decisions made in courts that we disagree with them and come up with a law for that to change the policy. And quite frankly, in the lower court, Mashantucket won that lawsuit. I think that that's something that has to be understood too. And I represent, in full disclosure, I represent the area surrounding the two tribal nations, and I represent both Ledger and Montville. And Ledger mayor would be here, except for he had a long plan, and he does not have cell service on the Adirondacks right now, so he cannot dial in. So I just wanted to say that we need to make sure that we're understanding that the vendors themselves get all of their services from the tribal nations, all of their services. Both tribal nations are off of state roads. They are off of state roads, they are off of highways, 214, Route 2, Route 32, Route 12. These are direct access roads to the two main business entities, and the two tribal nations, besides having businesses relative to the casinos, which are just businesses that support a tribal nation. They're not when our delegation visits the tribal nation, we ask to see the tribal nation. We want to know what is going on in the tribal nation, that we can impact laws. This last year, we passed the Indian Child Welfare Act, which was something that was very important, and we codified that in statute. But both of them are relative to the businesses that they have that support the tribal nations. Mohegan has the Mohegan Sun in Pennsylvania. They are building up South Korea. They have a resorts casino in Atlantic City, Ileana in Washington State, Falls River in Canada, Casino Niagara, Mohegan Casino at the Virgin Hotels in Las Vegas, and they are working in New York, in Manhattan. And Mashantucket has Foxwoods in El San Juan, the Norwich Inn and Spa, Command Holdings, Norwich Inn and Spa in Providence, Lake of Isles, Two Trees Hotel, the Preston Plains Water Company, Pequot Healthcare, and Wonder Nation. So they are very impactful within the community, and I think that when we're talking about this issue, there, in my opinion, is a direct attack on the sovereignty of the two tribal nations by not separating out what we should be doing. So I just wanted to sort of lay, as someone who has looked at and bored many of my colleagues with this non-stop, to say we should be dealing with this issue. It's important for us to deal with this issue, but talking directly to the vendors. And I think that Chuck is going to talk a little bit about this, but when we're talking real property, there is an agreement that in their original compact. So again, these are two different tribal nations. Mashantucket chose to go to court and fight in court. They spent a lot of time in court. Mohegan decided that they did not want to go to court, and so they came up with an agreement with the federal government, the state, and the town of Montville. And that is if they get in trust land over, please correct me if I'm wrong, land over 700 acres, and they would pay real property taxes on it. That's in the original compact agreement. Now, there is a fact that we have not been, as a nation, very good with our agreements with tribal nations broadly. We have put rules on them that have not been fair. We often, the rules that are fair, we break because we don't want to come up with rules that are impactful to them. We want to take as much control over their lands as possible. And so I think that when we're looking at this is not, to me, it's straightforward. We should make sure that we're representing the two tribal nations in our state with as much dignity and respect as we expect to do with any other community in our state. And if the town of East Hartford were to start taxing the city of Hartford for the fact that it needs more police because of activities that happen in Hartford, we would all be up in arms. We should just as much be up in arms on this particular situation and need to address the issue. Now, because this has been a longstanding policy in the state of Connecticut, our towns have taken in the revenue, and I think as my other colleagues in Eastern Connecticut, we don't want to see our towns suffer either. So we want to make sure that at least until we get this underway and change this policy, that we're ameliorating that cost differential. And we have a perfect vehicle. We have the Mashantucket Mohegan Pequot Fund, which receives dollars from the two business oriented at the by two tribal nations, and we are seeing an increase in the funding that's coming to the state of Connecticut as a result of the online gaming and sports betting that has been allowed in the state, and we have seen, and we will see soon, a lottery come up for providing additional dollars to take care of that. Thank you, Mr. Chair, for letting me speak.
Thank you, Senator. Does anyone else have any questions, comments, concerns about anything that we've spoken about? Before you're reaching for your.
I am, thank you. Sure. I just wanted to pick up, so, you know, as Senator Ross, we have two sovereign entities here. Federal records have sovereign entities that have long, complex histories and deep, complicated ties in the community, relationships, both, relationships between entities and personal relationships. And I mean, it is incredibly complex, as Senator Austin has laid out a lot there. But I wanted to pick up in particular on something that Congress said a few minutes ago about one of the challenges here is just the lack of clarity. And the fact that there being this issue is under federal law, as you know, Matt made out a minute ago, is subject to this complicated balancing test, which, as we know from all, that balancing test, which I've written many legal briefs about. They can come out different ways depending on the fact pattern. And to me, that's something that I want to pick up on, is that as these entities manage, both the family that is the tribe and also the business entity that is the tribe, that lack of clarity is difficult. And I that to me, appeals to me in terms of trying to resolve that issue and to try to provide some level of certainty on this complex and important issue. Of course, so I am interested in sort of trying to focus on what the numbers are. And as Senator Austin also noticed, that obviously an important entity here, and we have the Mayor Montville online, I think, are the municipalities, because this is not the state taxing anybody. These are towns, these are municipal taxes. And so it is when the state acts to shut that down, it is the municipalities who bear that cost. And so they very much have to be part of that conversation, as Senator Austin laid out at the end there. And so I would hope, I don't know what the goal of this particular session is, or how we want to manage our agenda going forward, but to me, it's that need for clarity in the managing of relationships and businesses. That is what I'm seeking and, you know, one of the reasons why I'm happy to be sitting in this chair, because I hope we can try to find it, you know, we're not going to be able to right all wrongs here. We can't, you know, these two nations, as I have analogized to many other people, they are two nations. They are not the same in any conceivable way. And so we're never going to balance that in a way that makes them the same. We wouldn't want them to be the same, and it's not our job to tell them they should be the same. Dependent entities. So, but I hope that's what I guess I just wanted to say that we can find a way to provide clarity so that this, you know, to the both principled issues and the economic issues.
Thank you. Representative Cheeseman.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary, and I want to echo what my friend, the House Chair of Finance, had to say, but also Senator Austin referenced promises made and promises broken. And I would like to raise that issue with regard to our municipalities, because on many occasions, we as a legislature have committed to do things for municipalities and have failed to follow through, or have only done this for a couple of years. So in all the conversations about our avenues for keeping municipalities whole, I just want us all to focus on the fact that what we decide for a 2-year period is not in perpetuity. So as the municipalities are facing potentially significant loss in terms of their revenue, they must have some certainty that any remedies we propose to keep them whole are actually remedies that can be carried out as long as is necessary. So I think their voice and that need for certainty and for promises kept also needs to be heard. Thank you very much.
Representative Cheeseman, thank you very much. So,
I'm
to that.
sorry. It's Representative Walker.
Walker, please, go ahead.
I can't see how to raise my hand on the screen. I apologize. I want to thank everybody for their concern and their commitment to looking at this. But I want to also remind us that it is an independent nation, and we must honor that independence also. We can point out many things in history where we had, as a government, done things that had been overturned because of the legality, of the fairness, and the importance of us to stay with the commitment to all people in our country, in our nation. So I think what I really am concerned about is, how do we look at tribal nations? If they are an independent nation, how do we define that, and how do we allow that interaction going forward? I think we have to look at Oklahoma, we look at some of the other rulings, but as we all know, the federal government is looking much more carefully in the way they've defined independence and nation, because of the fact that we had a commitment to the nations to allow them to operate and function just in that manner. So I look forward to really talking about that. We can't have this type of nation versus that type of nation. We have to have a uniformed idea, but we also have to have an understanding that they are an independent nation within our territories. So I think we need to allow their communities to thrive also. And I agree with Representative Cheeseman in the sense that we, as a General Assembly, do things every 2 years and we change them, and we've done it in many occasions. It does not make it right, but it does happen. So I think we've got to start with the fairness and the honesty of the law when it regards the independence of the tribal nations, and then we go from there. How do we make sure that we still maintain the support for our municipalities in the way that they expect also? So I don't want us to move away from the fact that we do have a responsibility to the tribal nation that has been established by the federal government for several years, and it is evolving to say that more independence and more support is important for them, just like any other neighborhood or district in this country. So I thank you for talking about it, and I look forward to reading some of the legal cases. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Walker. Other members of the work, Mr. Bennell.
I just wanted to appreciate what we've heard from previous chair. And I am not from today. Unfortunately, our Attorney General is in Korea. So we return later this week. We'll be very active as we move forward. We have in our southern nation. Esteemed colleagues don't have impacting their nation, but I think we're all seeing that it is far more complicated than a simple fix. That's why we ultimately passed legislation that brought us here together, so we can look at all these different agreements and make sure that we're doing, frankly, no harm or creating a disparity or lack of parity between these two nations, because of they are different nations with different constitutions and different elected leaders and different histories and different cultures. The unintended consequence of a simple fix might put one of us at a disadvantage. And I will speak directly for Mohegan, my employers, who sit here today, I'm the chairman as I walk in. He and his council firmly believes, had we had a simple fix, we would not be simple. And we would not be treated equally within the borders of the country. And that's what they're hoping. They are hoping that through a series of meetings, looking at everything, we can find a pathway that we've done no harm to either, and recognize that these are nations that are providing these services within your borders and doing all sorts of wonderful things. Thank you for all that. It isn't simple, it is complicated.
Thank you, Mr. Burnell. And just to say it, there's at least one other level of complexity here, in as much as the state budget itself and the state taxpayers themselves need representation in all these deliberations as well. And I hope to bring that when necessary and needed. So how should we proceed going forward? We appear to have a proposition on the table that is debatable. That is whether or not the state, or I'm sorry, I guess the municipalities can tax tangible personal property of non-tribal members that is on tribal reservation land. I'm aware that there is a U.S. Treasury Tribal Advisory Committee that the U.S. Treasury has impaneled, and they have a subcommittee on what's called dual taxation. And they have a report that I'm in receipt of, dated December 9, 2020, that I've not read in detail, but I'm aware of its basic thrust, and you've heard some of it here today. So I assume that's the proposition we're discussing, and what the impact would be to the tribes, to the state, and to the municipalities. I wonder if it would be useful to have presentations on that report, and or maybe both tribes could provide their perspective on that proposition and what it would look like, and be able to answer questions from the panel at some point in the near future. Does that sound agreeable, Mr. Cummings?
That certainly sounds good with us. I think the report itself really lays out well the problems of dual taxation, why it's bad policy, and why what we're proposing really is consistent with good policy and really helping economic development on tribal lands. And so we'd be happy to walk through that, whatever the work we would like in terms of laying that out. Well, maybe we can schedule that for our next meeting at some point in the near future. I'm just going to say, to put it on the record so that everyone can hear me ask these questions in advance. I'd be interested in the argument that it is dual taxation, that having concessionaires on property in a facility with which you have a business relationship, is that in fact taxation? I'd like to hear that argument. Is that, or is that not simply a business arrangement? What is the impact on both tribes if we were to pass a law that did that level of exemption for personal property? We know what the fiscal note to date on at least one bill was. So it's about $1.3 million loss to both towns. The state would have to in some way make up for that. I'd like to know, what are the agreements that the towns have with the tribes? What would be the specific impact there?
What are the settled expectations in the towns and among the towns about this issue? It's obviously a long-standing issue, that they've been receiving this revenue for many decades. And it does appear to be a national issue in which the Congress of the United States and the Supreme Court of the United States are relevant. And unless and until they provide clarity, I guess my question is, why should the state of Connecticut unilaterally take this action in the absence of that federal action? That's just a question I have. So these are questions I would ask of the panel when they get here, of both tribes. Representative Warren?
I think that's an excellent list. May I add to that? I know we have OLR in the room. Some background, was kind of mentioned, other states taking a look at this and what other states have done to address this issue. Would be helpful.
And I also asked the Office of Fiscal Analysis to go over what they had provided as a fiscal note on the bill. So I expect to get that pretty soon and get that back to us so that we can provide that, because it may be less or more than that 1.3 million.
So when do you want to meet again? I happen to be away for a big chunk of August. I'm going to take a little vacation. So do people want to meet in a month? Late August, early September, or something like that? Okay, we will. Yeah, we have the staff, the appropriations committee have been assigned to us by this public act, which is handy. So I'll work with Susan Keene to set up the next meeting, but it'll be in that time frame, at least 30 days from now, probably a little longer than that. But hopefully we can get a presentation from the tribes on that topic. Representative Warren, you would like to.
I just was noting that the good finance administrator is joining. So very well with the joint effort. We want credit.
We have a joint staff here. And an executive branch chairman, all very strange. Anyway, so I thank you all for coming. Any other comments for the good of the order? So that'll conclude our first meeting of this working group, and we'll see you in the future.